Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is Listening Beyond the Soundbite. Today, my guest, joining me from Chicago, is that where you are right at the moment, Ed, is Chicago?
I'm right this moment. I'm in Michigan, actually, Pat.
There you go. We'll have to chat about that. Ed Tracy is my guest. He's an award-winning broadcast veteran, author, editor, and host of the Chicago-based Conversations podcast and Picks and Six, the theater review platform that he does. But we're here primarily to talk about his book, The Gorilla in the Room. Welcome to the show, Ed. We'll explain how Ed and I know each other. I had somebody on the other day on my radio show from Puerto Rico. That was hard to explain as well. But so you're in Michigan, not Chicago.
No, we moved to Michigan in 2021 in the middle of the pandemic.
Excellent.
To find a little peace and quiet up here.
Oh, there you go. Well, yeah, Chicago. I don't think I'd be big on living in Chicago myself. But in keeping with the show's format, I've asked Ed to take the first 10, 15 minutes of the show to talk about his book, Gorilla in the Room. It's part Vermont memoirs, lots of Vermont memoirs, and it's framed what they call a book musical, which is about 4 families dealing with cancer. And Ed, I'd love you to talk about the book, the message you are trying to convey, explain what a book musical is. It took me a little while to get used to that, but it was very intriguing. So take it away.
Well, you know, I'm a critic in Go, Pat, so play structure is important to me. So don't worry too much about the book musical part. There are several kinds of musicals, sung through musicals, which have really no story but are relatively sung through. The structure that we set up for Gorilla in the Room was a book musical, which is really what you would think of as a musical. It's got a story and people break out into song and the songs move the story forward. And that's what I envisioned when back in 2008, I was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer. And I ended up in a chemotherapy ward in Chicago for 6 months. And during that experience, I said more than a few times to the doctors, this would make an incredible musical. And they thought I was absolutely crazy. Back in 2008, when I was diagnosed with 3C colorectal cancer and faced about 6 months of chemotherapy, I was in the chemotherapy ward and realized that this could actually be a musical. It was just fascinating to watch 6 people move around with 35 chairs, and I was really absorbed in that idea. Told the doctors often that this would be something I'd love to do. And I think they thought I was a little crazy, a little nuts, but I think that they also felt that whatever gets you through that situation would be very good for the patient, and they put up with me. And my wife was there at the time. She was not my wife, she was my girlfriend, but we went through this together. And I found that the chemotherapy actually triggered some thoughts in my mind. Thoughts about people I knew when I was growing up, mentors, my family. And I started writing as a way to relieve the stress of all the things that were happening in my life. I was running a big military library out here. I was at a really fantastic time in my career, 53-year-old guy who was on television for 6 years, doing military author talks and Medal of Honor interviews and just having a glorious time. And this was sort of a wake-up call. I have to say that anytime you have a cancer diagnosis, you start to think about a whole lot of things. And I was instantly in the club, which is a phrase I use in the book. And that is anyone who's had cancer or ever had it. And not all the other people who are very concerned about you, who maybe are really interested in your well-being, they really have no idea, no concept of what it's like inside to deal with this kind of a diagnosis. So I started writing a journal entry every 3 months or so the first year, and used that as a way to tell people who really cared about me, were calling and sending cards and letters and doing all these kinds of things, to send to them and give them an update. And it turned into quite a sizable essay. It's about 8,000 words. And I probably sent it to 100 people or so, all of whom immediately went out and got colonoscopies because that was really the point of that essay was don't let this thing sit around. This is a very curable disease. It doesn't have to be as bad as what I dealt with, but certainly if you find it early, if you know your family's medical history, if you have it in your family, you should get checked even earlier now. The new date is 45, but I would say even 40 if you have any inclination that you have colorectal cancer in your family. That's a good time to be approaching your doctor and asking them about it. So those are some of the things that were flowing around in my head, and I wrote that first year as a way of therapy. It was very cathartic for me. And at the end of that year, in June of 2009, very good friend and mentor of mine, John Calloway, passed suddenly. It was a real turning point in my life. He was a good friend. We conversed a lot. We had great conversations. He was a tremendous journalist in Chicago, was on the show at the theater, at the library, and he was gone. So I found myself starting to continue those conversations in the forms of a letter. And those letters would always start out, I've been thinking a lot today about farming, hunting, or some other topic that I thought I'd like to explore. And those essays became a real integral part of what the book has become now, 10 years later. And so you put together the journal history of my cancer journey and these very personal letters to John Calloway, which are essays about my past, and then other letters to other friends and other writings. It was quite a massive material, and an editor, Kelly Kennedy, very good friend of mine, who was working on the theater review platform, developing that. I sent her all this information and said, I think there might be a book here. And she was very, very happy to receive it. She worked hard on it. She got to a point where she said, there's one thing missing in this piece. There's not a through line for all of these stories. They all kind of hover around something. They are interviews with Medal of Honor recipients that have been transcribed. There are a couple of television treatments of shows that I envisioned when I was recovering. And so I sent her the outline, the treatment of what I call my second Broadway musical, because I gave up on the first Broadway musical, the second Broadway musical, which is Gorilla in the Room. And it's about Joe Gorilla and his two, I call chaosals, who come into a treatment center in an urban area. Think Andre DeShields or Hugh Jackman, big song and dance man on a Broadway stage, coming into a treatment center with four families dealing with cancer in different ways. It's in the beginning, you kind of think that the gorilla in the room might be cancer. But I'm sure that as you read on, you realize that Joe Gorilla represents hope. And he's challenging people to continue, to not give up. And it's written for and about cancer patients. I think it's got a lot of legs, but it's not a fully developed, coalesced piece yet. It's a treatment, and it is part of the narrative through line of the book, which Kelly thought was an inspired way to connect all of these stories. So all of these stories sort of appear in chapters that are acts and scenes, and they're grouped together in ways that people can understand. And they're tied together with the artwork of James Dietz, who did the cover art and also did some little signposts that go along the way. And we ended up about to publish just as the pandemic hit. It was delayed for about 6 months and was released in February of 2021. It turned out to be number 2 in cancer on Amazon, which I found incredibly hilarious, that a book on colorectal cancer made it to number 2 in colon cancer, but it also made it to number 1 in cancer category. during that period of time, and has consistently shown up in the 30s and 40s and 50s in theater biographies, which, from my point of view, that's what it is. It's there's a lot about UVM theater growing up, the lessons of how art can help transform us and how it can make us better people overall. So I hope that answers your question a little bit. I just threw a lot out there, and happy to see where we go from there.
Well, that's fabulous, Ed. Thank you very much. So I'm thinking, before we get into our question and answer part of this show, I'm thinking people are saying, how do I know a guy from Michigan who goes to Chicago and looks at theater? Well, Ed mentioned his military, the books and his interviews. When he was at Norwich for a long time, right, Ed? You were at Norwich quite a few years.
13 years.
There you go. Well, he put on a military writers symposium, which all of us in this area knew about and probably went to. He also broadcast Norwich hockey on WDEV, so he knew all those players. And he's a friend. And Ed and I were on the board of directors of Lost Nation Theater for a while, so that's how we got to know each other. And when this book came out, he called and said, hey, could you help spread the word? And I said, for sure. So he was on WDEV with me, and now we're on ORCA Media, and I hope we get the word out about this book because it's fascinating. And do you have any comments about all that we just talked about Norwich? And I mean, great memories for sure.
Well, Norwich, Northfield is my hometown, and I spent only about 20 years outside of Northfield, as it turns out, until I moved to Chicago. I had been in New York City for a while, and my dad got sick, and I decided to move my family back from New York. A very, very good job. Probably could still be at ASCAP now, all these years later, but I moved back to Northfield and started to work at Norwich, which really redefined what my goal in life was going to be. It's a military school. I was there for 13 years. They had a need for a program like the Colby Symposium, which brought and introduced military authors, and we were kind of growing the leadership program there, but in a more emotional and passionate way with literary thoughts. And these writers were amazing. And WDEV jumped on the opportunity to host them. Eric Michaels would interview the entire list of authors we had every year. It was really a fascinating way to introduce Vermont to this group of writers. And Norwich hockey, I got to tell you, just being a mentor, and there's a couple of chapters in there about George Como. I was just the statistician and the dart target for George Como and Dave Moody. I mean, they always picked on me, and I was fine. George not so much. Dave a lot, and we're still pals even
right.
today. Those guys made that whole program at Kreuzberg come alive.
That's
and I was there, fortunately, for the building of Kreuzberg Arena, which now is over 20 years old.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me that it's actually 25 years old this year.
Wow.
So that's just amazing to me that time flies so quickly. But it was a great time, and I still look back at Northfield very fondly. Obviously, I don't own any land there anymore, but I still stay in touch.
It's a great town, and obviously a fabulous university that we're all very proud of. So that's where Ed and I first met, and then you moved, and you are involved. Before we get onto the book, could you talk a little bit about the Conversation podcast you do and the Picks and Sticks? What a fun job you have.
Well, I wish it was more of a job than a pastime and passion, but I left the library and decided the next step was going to be a consultancy in these kinds of things. I was publishing books, finishing books for authors, and did project management and that kind of thing. I had an office in downtown. and always had the desire to go back to doing face-to-face interviews. The library programs were really important to me. I prepared for them. I loved doing it. And so I decided to shift my focus from the military, which I had done for 30 years, to art and culture. And there was a need to define people in the industry in 2013-14. I would go to these theaters. I'd sit down one-on-one with a microphone. It sounds very much like radio, the broadcast. Never compromised on that, by the way, even during the pandemic, kind of suspended the program because I felt that some of this online Zoom stuff and the kind of the thing we're doing right now is something I had done first back in the library in 2003. I mean, networks were trying to figure out how to use the internet when we were starting the library and doing this live on Thursday nights from the library. So I continued to do those radio-like conversations. I had them engineered by a friend, and soon I was doing shows that were currently playing, and people were asking me, "Well, what did you think about the show?" And I was seeing all the shows. So in 2014, I started the review platform. And it took a couple of years, but by 2019, we saw over 110 shows in Chicago.
Wow.
And that's just me and my wife, Denise, going out and seeing the shows, writing the reviews, posting them, and distributing them on our platform. And Pix and Six was trademarked it's a registered trademark back in that time frame. I think we got it in 2020. And I joined the American Theater Critics Association back in 2016 or 17 and kept continually trying to grow the platform to where it was just before COVID. It was really great. And then everything went out the window. I mean, all the theaters shut down. And for the next year or so, we were doing online reviews of shows online. It was a very, very difficult time for the industry, and they have not completely bounced back yet.
Right.
But last year, I think we did 50 or 60 programs. I have three people writing in Chicago who fill in the reviews when we can't go, and we'll probably cover 70 to 80 shows this year, which is not the full complement. I mean, there are reviewers out there who are doing 150 shows, and there are others like Chris Jones who does Broadway on top of all that, which is just an amazing accomplishment. But it's a great place for regional theater, black box theater, touring shows, Broadway in Chicago. We've seen some wonderful stuff. It's only 90 minutes. It's 90 minutes away, so we now have a commute. But we do it.
That's great. I have to tell you about Lost Nation Theater during the COVID. They did some plays by Zoom. And I could sit home and watch the play. It costs a little less than actually going to the theater. Could never replace going to the theater, but it was fabulous. I really enjoyed it. And I don't think they're continued it, which I sort of wish they would, but because sometimes you just can't get out.
Well, there's a lot to do with contracts, because theater being the union art, you have scene designers work, and you have the sound people, and you have the costumes, and then you have the actors and the directors, and all of that. All of those have separate contractual arrangements, particularly at the equity level. So it was before the pandemic, it was hard. Now they're all looking at all of that. That's why we're engaged in all these suits, because they're trying to figure out how the internet and AI is going to be using imaging and all of that for the future.
Yep. Well, I keep hearing about AI, and I have to get in with the program. I must admit, there's got to be information out there. I keep trying to learn as much as I can, because it's in our life, no matter what we do. So let's skip a little bit to the book, and I wanted to show people, first of all, I'm going to hold it up, but we're going to put on video. This is from chapter 6, and it's Act 1, Scene 2. And the way Ed has set this up, it's the setting where it takes place. And in this case, it's the treatment center waiting room. And there's a song listed, and it's called Gorilla in the Room, Chemotherapy Sucks. I think I like that the best because that is about chemotherapy, and it does suck. And then, as in the theater, he tells you about the setting, about what it's all about at the time of the scenes taking place. And Joe Gorilla sings Gorilla in the Room. I love it. So I think that all throughout the whole book, you can really envision yourself being in a theater and listening. I don't know how Joe sounds, but listening to Joe singing and others singing about what's happening. That was an amazing idea, Ed, seriously. Once I got into it, it was, I must admit, a little strange in the beginning. It took me a little while, but sometimes when I read a book, it takes me a while to figure it all out anyway. But once I got into it, it was fascinating. And to sit in the hospital like you did and say, I feel a book and a song coming on, that was great. Can you comment a little bit more about?
There was a lot of times. There were a lot of times when that was happening. I will tell you, I don't think there's anyone who's been through chemotherapy that would not roar at the song "Chemotherapy Sucks." I mean, it's just, it does, and it's kind of a catchy little tune. I'm not going to sing it for you because I don't have any accompaniment, but I will say that the structure of the book improved greatly when we inserted some of James Dietz's art, this little gorilla who's
Right.
looking around the door. Every time you see that in the book, you know that you're going back to the play. You know that now we're going back to the play and we finished whatever little stories we were telling before. So that's a signpost for readers. And that helped a lot because early readers were as confused as you were about trying to get into the flow of,
Right.
of what's happening.
Yeah. Well, and right now I would like to put up the book cover itself because that is, it really grabs you. And it's this gorilla in a room, but the artwork is fabulous. It really, you really want to know what it's all about, and that's the purpose of a cover, I'm assuming, that it just grabs you. So you were very fortunate to have the folks who did that for you. It really captured it all. How did that come about? I mean, obviously the title was Gorilla in the Room, but it was great.
Well, I was sketching too. During all this time, I was putting up sets and costumes and little hand sketches, and I thought about Times Square and what would be the marquee in Times Square, and it was this big sign that said "Gorilla in the Room," and it was being held up by a gorilla's hand, like this, but you couldn't see his thumb. You couldn't see the gorilla's thumb. It was kind of goofy.
Huh.
So when we got around to the cover, I wanted James Dietz to do the cover, and he said, "Well, we need an art director." And I said, "Well, I have a pretty good idea what I'd like to do on this." I said, "Maybe you'll work with me," and he did. He took me at my word, and so I gave him all the stuff that I had written about in this kind of semi-haze, that I saw the gorilla coming out of a stage door on a Broadway
Right.
theater in Times Square, and on the back there is a lamppost, a traffic signal, and the gorilla. You can't see the gorilla's face there, but you can see all the rest of his torso sitting at the top of the traffic stoplight, bending the post over, kind of defying Times Square, but not being as big as King Kong or anything. And I have to say, over the course of 4 or 5 days in the weekend, we never talked about it. We texted back and forth. He would send me drawings, all of which I have. He shared everything with me, and gave me all of the original art. Actually, I have that
wonderful.
too here. Which doesn't have the cover titles and stuff on top of it. But it didn't change much from that last, from our submission to Kohler Books. They were very ecstatic about what work was done. And I got to tell you, Kohler did a terrific job putting this all together,
That's great.
because the interior of the book has little sprocket holes like a script would have in
Right.
a three-ring bind. And so there's a lot of little pieces of this book, including the dates of all of the essays and how you can follow through what was happening to keep you on track.
That's great. Well, and I'm sure the minute you saw the front cover, you knew that was it, because when you look at it, it's just so, it's there. It just tells the story. And once you've read the book, then it even means more when you see it. So that's a great cover, and I hope people will buy it and check it out. When you and I talked a while ago, you mentioned that your treatments made your memories sharper. And I have, as I said before, I have never had chemo or radiation. Were you expecting that to happen? Because you hear terrible things about chemo and radiation, and you said it made the little gray cells sharper. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I had the surgery, which was quite extensive. 20% of my colon was removed.
Wow.
And at the time when I had the surgery, they said probably 10% chance you're going to have chemotherapy. I think we got it all. You probably won't have to have it. And then when they did the biopsy, they said, we should do this prophylactic treatment, which is going to be pretty aggressive. It's 12 treatments over 6 months, every 2 weeks.
Wow.
And I did not really want to know what it was all about. I just wanted to get through it and get back to work, try to adjust. So I was at the library and had a big count. We were on sabbatical. We were on hiatus from the show in the summer, but we were starting back up again in September, and this was July. So we started to calendar all of the shows so that my treatments would fall on a time when I didn't have as much to do, and I had at least one weekend to kind of bounce back. And I have to say that you don't have a lot of energy for anything much more than that. I mean, I was trying to get through the day. I was trying to keep up my personal life. I was trying to have a little fun, but I didn't feel like it too much. And the rest of the time, I just really wanted to sleep. I mean, I just wanted to be in the bed, and chemotherapy for me, and it's different for everybody, but for me, I couldn't sleep. I mean, you're just kind of in a kind of a catatonic state. And so I found myself up a lot, and I wanted to be productive. And so I started writing these things as a way to fill that time in a really positive way. And when I started writing, I realized that somehow these chemicals had triggered my memory of certain events through my life. I've always had a memory for lines and those kinds of things, but it started to trigger really like cinematic views of what was happening. I mean, right down to the little pieces. And the first piece in the book is about hunting. And I was a 12-year-old out in the field trying to shoot a deer with a bow. I mean, I was tremendously focused on everything that happened during that experience, because emotionally, for a 12-year-old, my heart was pumping out of my chest. And come to find out, I had an audience for this, which kind of ties back to the whole theater thing. And frankly, it was a 1-star performance. There were no 5 stars in this deer hunting experience. So, I think as readers find it, they say, well, yeah, I've had experiences as a youth that weren't great. I mean, I felt, and they have affected you forever, because, you're very vulnerable when you're young. But there's a lot of lessons in the book that way. And I kept finding myself writing about them and trying to figure out why my mind was bringing me back to this. What was the purpose of that? And once I kind of got into that routine, I realized there was a lot of valuable lessons I was learning that I didn't even realize at the time.
Isn't that, I've just never heard that. You're the only person that talked about their mind being being sharp, and I think that's amazing. I've always heard not so positive things about chemo, other than the fact that thank God it works. But I think that's great.
Well, whatever gets you through,
Well,
whatever
for
gets
sure.
you through, Pat.
For sure.
You know, it's like that's what worked for me. I will tell you that chemotherapy for a 53-year-old obese white man is different than
Right.
you know
Right.
a 30-year-old who is in shape. I mean, that guy or woman is going to be dealing with a lot of different issues because they don't have the
Right.
excess capacity to accept some of this stuff. And one of the doctors even said I'd lose 40 pounds, and he was right on the nose. I did. I lost 40 pounds, and almost no one noticed. You know,
Oh,
so.
Maybe they just didn't want to say it. I'm sure they did notice. But in this book, you talk a lot, and maybe it's from the help of the chemo, about people that you knew. And you talk a lot about, and you mentioned them earlier on, Kenneth Allen, Walter Ehlers, Tom Hudner, I hope I pronounced them right, Medal of Honor recipients. You have so much information there about these people who meant something to you in your life. And I think revisiting that must have been very emotional, if I may, and very meaningful. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, all of those stories revolve around a central idea of overcoming a challenge. Ken Allen, which is a piece that I had written prior to my chemotherapy, but Ken Allen became a colorectal cancer patient. I mean, that's what he passed. He passes that. I don't put that in the book because I found the story to be a really cavalier kind of story of his life, and he was just a terrific horseman at Norwich, a class of 22 polo player, and the story is about his polo career and how we recreated that polo match in 1996 at Norwich. The Valley Polo Club came over and played a match, and that was around the time that Ken had been flown up air ambulance to Northfield and passed away at the nursing home there, the Mayo Nursing Home. And so Ken's story is a little different in that he is a colorectal cancer patient, and also I should have known from that, my own situation. The other two, Walt Ehlers, 1944, D-Day, 3 days plus in the hedgerows. He was a gunner, and he received his medal 3 days for an action 3 days after D-Day. He had dialysis weekly for the last 6 or 7 years of his life, maybe more. I have to look at that date. But he traveled all over the country to talk to students and classes and people about the Medal of Honor and his life. His daughter is a wonderful, wonderful person who still works with the Medal of Honor Society. And that letter in there is to her about how Walt influenced me during his time. And really, you would find no greater person who could be an example to follow. And the same with Tom Hudner, who crash landed his plane in Korea. That is not so much a story or a letter. That's an actual interview about his exploits. And I did not know at the time that there was a book being written about him, which was turned into a movie recently. It's a major motion picture about his Medal of Honor action. So you can see a little different take in my interview. The facts are pretty much the same. But he crash landed his plane on a mountaintop in Korea to try to save his African-American wingman. And the movie escapes me what the name of it is, but it's a one-word name. Maybe we could figure it out here in a minute.
Don't you love it when the brain kicks in after a while? I have that happen all the time. I blame it on my age. I usually wake up at 2 in the morning and I think about it, but I promise not to call people, right? Oh, I remember. But anyway, the stories in there are just beautiful. And I thank you for sharing all those. How wonderful. I have to read the publisher, and you pronounced as Kohler? Kohler Books. Is that the? So the
That's
publisher
right.
at Kohler Books said about Ed, Ed Tracy was the perfect candidate for cancer, and I quote. And it's a pretty stark comment, but I know what he was trying to say, that you turned this devastating diagnosis into a positive message and trying to help people who, through cancer, with hope and asking them to join the Cancer Club, because we're all in this together, as you just said. And I think it's amazing that you've really challenged people to look at their life and to turn it around into something positive. And that alone is worth reading this book and understanding what Ed was trying to do. So good for you, Ed. I think that's great. I hope people have learned that lesson of hope. When people have read the book, have they reached out to you and made comments along that line about thank you?
Well, I hear from a lot of people who are not only cancer patients, which I think is a good read. I mean, it's a good
Yep.
read for them. They know the story. It's familiar to them. But also the caregivers who really are hugely important to every cancer patient out there. They're the ones who are, doing the big lift every day to make things easier. But I typically sign the book, tell your story. I mean, this is mine. There's no way that anyone's ever going to know your story unless you tell it to
Right.
the people around you, the people you love, your friends, your family. And one of the most important parts of that is you are dealing with this particular type of cancer, which is very treatable and also tends to run in families. So,
Right.
for example, both of my grandfathers died of a cancer, one of lung cancer, one of something related to colorectal cancer, but they called it something different then.
Huh.
But come to find out, both of them had colorectal cancer. And
Oh.
had I known that as a young man, had somebody said to me, your grandparents had colorectal cancer, I would have then
Right.
gone through the motions to make sure that I was tested early, that I could get ahead of this thing,
Right.
and have regular colonoscopies, which are really the best defense
Right.
for this particular type. And so I really think it's the number one thing that people tell me is that I did go out and I talked to my grandmother or my mother or my uncle, and I found out the information within my family. And I would say that pretty consistently, 7 out of 10 have somebody
Right.
in that category.
Right. Well, I think your point about finding it early, and they always keep saying that, the earlier you find it, the better chances you have of beating it. And a lot of this stuff doesn't have any signs. You go to the doctor feeling great, and they go, sit down, I have to talk to you after you've gone through the test. So, and I didn't realize that it was hereditary. Is that the right word? I guess that it does run in families, and that's important to know. The one chapter I particularly liked, because we're talking about chemotherapy, was chapter 46, and it starts out where you're talking about accommodating chemotherapy, and you talked about your final chemotherapy session and your marriage to Denise. And I like that chapter, so if you could tell us a little bit about that, that would be great.
Well, the story really kind of starts during this Labrador fishing trip when my good friends were up there holding my bags, carrying my bags, and I was putting on kind of a demonstration of how to catch char, but I was tired every day. I walked in one night and said to them point blank I was going to go back to Chicago and I was going to ask Denise to marry me. And I told them that because I've never lied to them, and I knew they'd hold me up on it if I tried to wiggle out some way. So I came back to Chicago, and this would be in late August, and we were about to start up the show and do all of that stuff. And I remembered that Denise's favorite movie is Moonstruck, And there's a scene in Moonstruck where Cher talks about the importance of a ring. She says, you don't want to ever ask a girl to marry you without a ring. And that thing started rattling around in my head. I was like, how am I going to get the ring size before I want to ask her to marry me? So I called my friend Jason Siegel, who's one of the people I knew in the book. He's got a whole chapter dedicated to him. Great guy. But he was also a jeweler. And he said, Ed, you've got to get this ring size somehow, however you do it. Just, you've got to do it because this is a big deal and we don't want to have to redo the thing.
Right.
So I thought of all of these ways to get a woman's ring size. One person even suggested, well, why don't you fit her for a bowling ball? And I actually thought that was a pretty good idea. I almost thought that I would bring a bowling ball home and say, honey, we're going to be bowling. But time was running out. And so one night when she was getting changed to go back to her apartment and go to work the next day, I said, honey, I've got a question to ask you in a couple of weeks, but I have to ask you one now before I do that. And she looked confused, and I said, I need to know ring size. And she started flipping out like, I'm very busy and all this is going on, and you were asking me to marry you right now? And I said, no, I'm not asking you to marry you because
I
I
don't
don't have a
ring.
ring yet. So I just need your ring size. And on the way out, she said, can I at least tell my mother? I said, don't tell your mother. Just, give me the ring size. So about 3 weeks later, we got together in one of our favorite restaurants here, the Hugo's Frog Bar. They have a little elevator booth where you can sit in there. And that's where I
Nice.
proposed to her and I gave her her ring. And it was a great part of the story is my relationship with Jason, who said, I'll do this for you someday. And it was, it wasn't like he gave me the ring. It's probably the most expensive thing I bought, that isn't a car.
Right.
And
Exactly.
so we had a wonderful period with that, but we actually got married during the chemotherapy. And it was on New Year's Eve. And in order to go on our honeymoon, I had to interrupt, in order to get married, I had to interrupt the flow of the chemotherapy treatments, which was a challenge. And then we went on a honeymoon to Hawaii after that. That's sort of the ending of that journalistic story in that year of what we were going through.
That's great. Well, God bless her. God bless the both of you. That's great. I did a show about a friend of mine went through cancer with his wife, and he wrote an amazing book about being a caregiver. And the message there in that book is take care of yourself as a caregiver. So, because I don't think people realize the toll it takes because you're worried and you want to make sure the person's okay. So, sounds like she was an excellent caretaker, Ed. Caregiver, sorry.
She was a rock, and I know that she went through all those feelings, and I never saw them during that time, but she was definitely a rock.
That's great. Well, Ed, we have a few minutes left, and I just wanted to know, do you have a favorite chapter? I don't think you ever mentioned to me what's a chapter that sticks out in your mind, or are they're all so personal it may be hard to pick one. Do you have one that I should go home and reread?
Well, they are all like sons and daughters.
Right.
I love them equally. And all the stories of people I knew, very important. Plus, there's a lot in this book about my relationship with my mother and father and what she went through. I won't give that away so much, but my mother was a very strong person who had her own challenges, and it's a beautiful, strong part of the book, and
Nice.
it's a page out of the book that I did not write. That's actually her letter. If you ask me to choose one particular chapter, which you are, I'm going to go with the chapter about my friend James Wimsett, Velvet, who was a classmate of mine at UVM, director. He had a huge career in Connecticut. He was on the radio, big bands, just one of the most amazing musicians wrote music. You can still go to his website and hear his music. But I talk about some of the stuff we got into in UVM. There's a part in there about a photo shoot, which I think you have a picture of, which is hilarious. Every time I look at it, I think about him. But one of the big parts of that era, that time, was how important all of the growth of the UVM theater department was at that time. I mean, there's one picture of these 45 people, most of whom are still alive, and we're all still friends. And that's
Oh,
50
that's
years
great.
ago this year.
That's great.
UVM is celebrating the 50th anniversary of the opening of that theater. James Wimsett and all those people in the picture and all the shows that we did over the 3 or 4 years we were there are really vibrant, wonderful memories to
Nice.
me. And there's also a piece in there about our 40th reunion, which I wrote to the president of UVM, Tom Sullivan, wrote a large letter about the opening of that theater and how important it was to me. And the idea that STEM, science,
Right.
technology, engineering, and math, should really have an A in it. It should be STEAM, and it should have an A for the arts, because the arts are very, very much. And I had that idea back in 2014, and we still haven't made a lot of progress in that area. So in terms of messaging, those are important, but in terms of heart and passion, my friend James is up there looking down, wondering why I'm on this little Zoom call right now talking to you, because he would rather see me doing something, with music or something else. So.
Well, I'm going to steal your STEAM idea, because I have to keep writing to our economic development people to talk about this state and all the amazing talent we have here in the arts. And it's all encompassing. I don't think there's one part of the arts that we don't have people that are well known and promoted. And we should do that here in the state. And I don't think we do it justice. So with your permission, I'm going to push STEAM, because that's great.
Well, the arts are a very important piece of every community.
Yep, absolutely.
Whole communities are formed around the arts, music, theater, film, all those kinds of things. And it's been a real important point, and I hope you have some success with that.
That's great. Ed, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been a delightful interview, one of my favorite people. And we will promote the event that's happening at UVM on April 12th and 13th. Plus, we will promote that March is colon cancer, it's a long word to say, colon rectal cancer awareness month. And we will make sure that people go get tested.
You want me to help you?
Yeah, please do it.
It's colorectal cancer awareness month.
Excellent.
Is March.
That's great. Go get tested.
But it's every day, though. If it's in your family, colorectal cancer awareness should be top of mind.
Good for you, Ed. Thank you very much. You've lived a wonderful life, and continue to live it and do good things. Thanks, Ed Tracy.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the opportunity.
No problem.
All the best back there.
Thank you. This is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the sound bites. See you soon. Bye.